In 1973, a fire broke out in the dispatch office of the Ulyanovsk cloth factory. When the fire was extinguished and the room was aired out, the firefighters found the body of a woman inside. On the charred floor lay Valentina Isayeva, the cashier-dispatcher of the factory's garage. The body was disfigured. Judging by the traces, the woman was first struck on the head with a metal rod as long as a crowbar. The blow was so strong that it fractured the bones of her skull. The corpse was thrown nearby, as if the killer didn't even try to hide the evidence. After that, he took out a knife. The blows were delivered to the defenseless body, as if out of hatred or frenzy. When the investigators entered, the floor around Valentina was covered in burnt blood. The entrails were spilled out, as if the perpetrator had thrown them aside, or as if Valentina, with her abdomen slashed open, had tried to crawl away from the murderer.
Burnt intestines, large intestines are lying there.
A small metal safe stood next to the body, all darkened with peeling paint. It didn't look impressive, but it had a tricky lock. It could only be opened with a specific sequence of key turns. On the floor near the safe lay a key, bent as if someone had tried to turn it by force in a fit of anger. The investigators immediately formed a picture of the crime. The perpetrator knew there was a safe in the dispatcher's office. The salary for the factory workers had arrived the day before, and his target was the money locked in that safe. And Valentina Isayeva was in his way. He attacked her, took the key, but couldn't manage to open the lock. In desperation, blinded by rage, the criminal yanked the door again and again, fiddling with the key in the lock until he bent it. Then he grabbed that same metal rod, bloodied after the blow to the head, and started pounding on the lock, on the safe, trying to pry and break open the door. But the construction turned out to be sturdy. The safe didn't give in. Realizing he was wasting time, the criminal dropped the rod and left, leaving the unclaimed loot inside, a stack of bills his hand never touched. To cover his tracks, the murderer set the dispatcher's office on fire. Unfortunately, you're on the Strashnota channel, and today's video is about what inner emptiness can lead to. People often ask me, Kirill, what's up with your nose? I've never told anyone, but I'll let you in on a secret. So, I was walking late at night, after the Vremya program, and suddenly a terrifying maniac attacked me. Well, you understand I had to fight back with my nose. The conclusion is obvious. Don't watch the Vremya program, you don't need it. Leave likes, dislikes, write comments, but only after you watch this video to the end. And subscribe to the Strashnota Telegram channel. I'll leave additional materials and sources there. Also, subscribe to Boosty and Patreon. These are my backup platforms, which you can subscribe to for free. Valya Isayeva was respected at the factory, calm, friendly. She never got involved in conflicts, never gossiped, never was rude. In the garage, she was known as someone you could approach with any request. She would help out, lend a hand, sometimes even lend money to her colleagues. When news of her death broke, her colleagues were in shock. People couldn't believe that anyone could raise a hand against Valya. They couldn't comprehend that the perpetrator might be from their own circle. Dozens of people worked at the factory, but the area was closed off and outsiders were not allowed in. The gates were guarded and the security staff knew everyone. Besides, why would an outsider sneak into an industrial facility? Especially into the control room, where even the employees themselves rarely went without a reason. Information that a large amount of cash had been delivered there couldn't have reached outsiders. Only a few employees knew about this. That means the person who took Valentina's life wasn't an outsider. He lived for this factory. He ate in the same cafeteria. He greeted people in the mornings at the checkpoint. At the crime scene, the investigator noticed a detail that at first seemed insignificant. There was a metal bucket lying by the wall. The firefighters thought that the workers had left it, but upon inspection it became clear. This bucket was used for diesel fuel. Someone brought fuel from a barrel and poured it on the floor, trying to set the place on fire and cover their tracks. At the factory, only the drivers used such buckets. Each had their own. When they started checking, one bucket was missing. It was assigned to a bus that was operated by a driver named Utkin. The officer headed to his home. The driver himself opened the door, barefoot, wearing a tank top with a wrinkled face. When he heard that he was being asked to come in to give a statement, he started making excuses, saying he had no time because he had a route in the morning. The room was stuffy, it smelled of tobacco and alcohol. The officer noticed someone moving behind the curtain near the bed. He pulled the fabric aside and saw a naked girl. Utkin hurriedly said that this was his fiancée and, grumbling, started pulling on his pants. But instead of obediently going for questioning, he suddenly rushed to the wall and grabbed the rifle hanging there. The policeman didn't lose his composure. He put his hand inside his jacket, pretending to reach for his pistol, even though he wasn't carrying a weapon. Utkin froze. For a few seconds he stood there, hesitating, then his shoulders dropped and he silently handed the rifle to the officer. It turned out to be loaded. A minute later, handcuffs snapped onto the driver's wrists. The search of Utkin's house began immediately after the arrest. They worked quickly and methodically. The table, the wardrobe, the dresser, the bed. They turned everything over, down to the last rag. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. In the kitchen, among the tools, there was a knife. The blade was poorly cleaned. There were brown stains on it, dried blood. The forensic examination would later confirm it was this knife that was used to finish off Valentina Isayeva. But the main discovery was still ahead. At the construction site where Utkin was tinkering with some household project, the investigators came across a strange doll. At first glance it was just a toy, large, about the size of a child, crudely made out of rags. But it looked strange and frightening. Someone had decorated the doll with various items that seemed unrelated to each other. On its head was a child's hair clip with a shiny bead. In its ear, a single gold earring. On its wrist, a woman's watch. On its leg, a single knitted sock. The police officers froze. They had seen these things before, in photographs from old cases. A few years ago, a wave of brutal crime swept through the Ulyanovsk region and neighboring areas. Girls and young women would disappear, and later they would be found mutilated and humiliated. Personal belongings, watches, jewelry, and small trinkets would disappear from the bodies. Back then, the criminal was never found. Now everything pointed to the fact that the person they had been searching for all these years had been living among them and driving a bus around the city. He drove workers to the factory and in the evenings returned home to his terrifying doll. The series of disappearances began on the last day of March 1968. Schoolgirl Liza Makarova left her home and never returned. At first no one believed it could be serious. After all, things like that happen. She might have visited a friend and stayed late, but when it got dark and calls to acquaintances led nowhere, the search began. The police, patrols and volunteers all combed the city and the surrounding areas. They walked in lines through the groves, climbed over fences, looked into ravines, attics and basements. They checked all the hospitals and morgues, both in the city and in the region. Days passed, but no trace was found. At home, little Masha sat in silence, Liz's younger sister. It seemed to her that everything that happened was because of her.
She called me Lizunchik and she teased me by calling me Masha Zamarasha. I used to get upset. If we had gone to Mom together back then, none of this would have happened. Now I can't forgive myself for it.
In the morning, the girls had a fight because of Mom's illness and some silly watch that both of them wanted to wear to go visit Mom in the hospital. Unable to decide who would go with the watch, they used a counting rhyme to settle it. Liza won, put on the watch and left, while Masha, feeling hurt, stayed at home. She stood by the window and watched as her sister went out into the yard. That was the last time Liza was seen alive. Since then, Masha has lived with this memory like a splinter under her skin. She often thought that if she hadn't been stubborn and had gone with Liza, everything might have been different. But 2 months have passed. The city had almost stopped talking about the missing girl. Life went on as usual. New concerns overshadowed old worries. And only the parents were still searching, going from address to address, sending inquiries, asking everyone who might know anything. On a warm day by the river, children were playing. They were launching a toy boat on the water. It was small, with a little motor. It trembled and whirred, maneuvering around snags and grass near the shore. One of the boys noticed that the boat had gotten stuck in the bushes. He waded into the water, pushed the branches aside, and shouted so loudly that the others rushed over to him. In the thick shade, there was a body lying there. Her hair was tangled, her limbs twisted by cramps. There was almost nothing left of her face. When the police arrived and pulled out the body, there was no doubt. It was Liza. They found her 300 kilometers from home. The expert's conclusion? Drowned, water in the lungs, river water.
This is where we found her. And there are no words to describe what she looked like.
But the girl couldn't have fallen into the river by herself. Her hands were tied behind her back. Due to the condition of the remains, it was no longer possible to say for sure if she had been assaulted. She had spent too much time in the water. The face was unrecognizable. The mother was called to the morgue for identification. She walked in, saw the body, and collapsed right at the table. The doctors later said that she had a heart attack.
When my mom went to identify her at the morgue, she became ill and was hospitalized for a heart attack.
None of her personal belongings were found. Both the dresses and Mom's watch, the very one the sisters had argued over that morning, had disappeared. 2 weeks after Liza's body was found, a new crime occurred in the Ulyanovsk region. 17-year-old resident of a small village, Valya Ananicheva, went to Ulyanovsk to buy a dress and shoes for her graduation. In the city, she spent the night at her older sister's place, and in the morning, while getting ready to go home, she mixed up the addresses of the old and new bus stations and missed the express bus. A similar situation once happened to me as well. Valya called her sister from a payphone and said that she wouldn't wait for the next bus and would try to leave on a regular bus. That was the last conversation anyone had with her. They found the driver of the regular bus quickly. He remembered the girl, neat, with a shopping bag, wearing a light-colored dress. According to him, she got off a couple of kilometers before her village. After that, no one saw Valya. 2 days later, her body was found by a country road leading towards her home. The girl was killed by suffocating her. There were signs of abuse on her body. One gold earring was missing from her ear. Experts concluded that it could have been lost during the struggle. At that time, these details were not given much importance. But a couple of months later, there was a new crime. This time in the neighboring Penza region. 13-year-old Tanya Aksenova did not return home after an evening walk with her friends. That evening, she was walking along a familiar road just a few hundred meters from home. At first, her family thought that Tanya was staying late with someone she knew. But soon it became clear that the girl was missing. Her body was found a day later in a grove near the village. Forensic experts determined that Tatiana had been sexually assaulted and then killed. Among her personal belongings, a bright hair clip she used to braid her hair that morning was missing. At the time, this was considered an accidental loss. The next victim was older than the previous ones and managed to stand up for herself. Lyubov Stroganova lived in a typical 5-story panel building on the outskirts, and her fiancé lived in the building across the street. That evening, they agreed to meet in the courtyard. The girl went downstairs, left the entrance, and had already reached the corner when a stranger stepped out from behind the wall. He covered her mouth and stabbed her several times. But the girl broke free, pushed the attacker away, and covered in blood, rushed back into the entrance. Neighbors ran out when they heard her screams. Nikolai Ignatiev, who lived 1 floor above, was the first to run out onto the stairs. When he saw the man running, he rushed after him but couldn't catch up. The criminal disappeared into the courtyards. At that time, no one knew that this brief episode would become fateful. The one who attacked remembered Ignatiev. He remembered the face of the man who, that evening, didn't let him finish what he had started. Severely wounded Lyuba was taken to the hospital. For several days the doctors fought for her life, and in the end they managed to bring her back from the brink.
Here, right here, and here on my shoulder there are a lot of stitches, 13 in total.
The knife passed just a few millimeters from the artery. When Lyuba regained consciousness, she was able to speak. She said that before the attack she saw a large truck near the house, like a Kamaz, but with a trailer. She couldn't name the brand as she wasn't familiar with vehicles. The investigators checked all the semi-trucks that entered the city that day, but they didn't find any specific matches. The truck remained a vague lead in the case, and the disappearances continued. The girls disappeared in different districts, with no pattern at all, as if someone was deliberately covering their tracks. But from each victim, the criminal took some small item, an earring, a hairpin, a watch. It seemed he was keeping trophies for himself. The geography of the crimes was expanding rapidly. The police concluded that the criminal was most likely a long-haul truck driver traveling through several regions. When witnesses were questioned, it was discovered that someone had seen a rare Kolkida truck near one of the crime scenes. It was a rare model. In Ulyanovsk and the neighboring Penza regions there were no more than 100 of them. The circle of suspects finally narrowed, only the detectives didn't know that the criminal had already gotten ahead of them. After the attack on Lyubov, he realized that he could have been remembered, and the truck was too noticeable a clue. He asked his superiors to transfer him to another vehicle and soon changed jobs. When the investigators started checking all the Kolkida drivers, his name was no longer on the lists. At that time, there was only one bridge across the Volga in Ulyanovsk. On the morning of November 28, 1968, 10-year-old Lyuda was hurrying to school. She was running late and decided she would get there faster if someone gave her a ride. She stood alone at the bus stop, wrapping her scarf tighter against the wind. A truck pulled up nearby. The driver leaned out of the cab and offered her a ride. Lyuda, only worried that the bell would ring soon, agreed without hesitation and got in with him. A classmate who was standing nearby later said that he saw her get into the cab. No one called out to the girl back then, so what if she asked for a ride to the other side? They searched for her for a long time. For weeks they combed the shores, the groves, the attics, and questioned the drivers. There were no traces. And then, a chance discovery. About 3 months after her disappearance, they found a body off the road. It had been there so long that it was impossible to identify the girl. But the mother recognized the woolen sock with the uneven pattern that she had once knitted herself. The second sock was missing. In May of '69, another tragedy occurred. This time, the attack happened right in the center, just 100 meters from the regional police headquarters and the party committee building. The victim was a young woman, Olga Zhernova. The attacker assaulted her, violated her, and suffocated her. Everything happened quickly and quietly, as if he knew exactly how to act so that no one would hear. When the investigators examined the crime scene, it became clear. Robbery was ruled out. The bag, documents, even the small change in the pockets, everything was in place. Only a thin gold chain from her neck was missing. This time the investigators had a theory. About a month before the tragedy, Olga took her neighbor's husband away. This caused a scandal in the house and led to threats. That neighbor, Anna, had a brother who had once served time for theft and was now working as a driver at a transport depot. And he was the first to come to the attention of the police. An officer was sent to the suspect to check if he was home and to talk calmly. But as soon as he reached the right floor, he heard women's screams coming from behind the door. He didn't wait for backup and broke down the thin plywood door with his shoulder. Inside there was chaos. In the kitchen, an enraged man with a cast-iron frying pan in his hands was hitting a woman on the head. The policeman rushed between them, and the blow landed on him too. He also got hit on the head with the frying pan. Bam! In the end, the officer got away with a concussion. The woman survived too, but the troublemaker took advantage of the chaos, ran out into the stairwell, and disappeared. Now he needed to be found urgently and checked to see if he was the same person who was terrorizing 3 regions. 2 days later, the fugitive showed up at home himself, not suspecting that an ambush had already been set up in the apartment. The arrest went without resistance. During interrogations, he swore that he had never taken anyone's life. He said that he had a quarrel with his wife, lost his temper, went too far, and the policeman just happened to be nearby. What girls? Are you crazy? He protested. When they checked the trip logs at the motor depot, his alibi was confirmed. At the time 10-year-old Lyuda disappeared, he was on a trip hundreds of kilometers away, and in general, the routes of his trips almost never crossed the crime scenes. After the investigation, it became clear that this person had nothing to do with the series of attacks. Meanwhile, the criminals seemed to have vanished. The reports were silent. No disappearances, no attacks, as if someone had broken the terrible chain. Later, it would become clear that he didn't go underground, didn't change cities, and didn't run away. He simply decided to hide where no one would think to look, in prison. The murderers sensed that the police were getting close and came up with a way to wait it out. He committed a street robbery blatantly in public, as if he deliberately set himself up. He got his sentence and spent 3 years behind bars, watching as everything around him calmed down. During this time, the attacks stopped. In the investigative departments, the cases were gathering dust on the shelves, and the investigation had reached a dead end. Witnesses forgot details, detectives quit, and new ones came in. Old papers were turning yellow with time in the folders. The series remained unsolved. After being released in the fall of 1972, the criminals seemed to breathe a sigh of relief after a long lull. 3 years in prison didn't change him, they only made him more cautious and angrier. Just a few weeks after his release, he went hunting again. On October 30th in the city of Barish, a man attacked a woman named Skirdanova. He tried to sexually assault her, but the victim turned out to be stronger than he expected, fought back, managed to dodge, and ran away. But her testimony was not enough to find the villain. On December 15th, he went out on the highway again. He offered a ride to a young woman. In the evening, she was found dead not far from the road. The name of this woman could not be established. A week later, on December 22nd, not far from Mulovka station, he took the life of Galina Ruzanova. Everything repeated itself. The same pattern, the same traces, the same indifference to someone else's pain. On February 8, 1973, he committed his last crime in the dispatcher's office of the cloth factory, where he himself worked as a driver. He took the life of Valentina Isayeva with a blow from an iron rod, set the room on fire hoping to cover his tracks, but in his haste he left evidence behind. Among them was a bucket for diesel fuel, the very one he had taken from his own bus. It was this bucket that became the piece of evidence the police used to find him. The murderer turned out to be an ordinary guy, Anatoly Utkin, who had just turned 30 at the time of his arrest. The story of his birth was an unhappy one. During the war years, Ulyanovsk was full of wounded soldiers. There were several military hospitals in the city. In one of them, in 1942, a local guy named Viktor Utkin was recovering from his wounds. When he was discharged, he was supposed to return to the front lines, but on the way he stopped for a day in his native village near Ulyanovsk. Just for a short while, simply to see his wife, Marina. That night he gave her a handmade doll. It was simple, made from whatever materials were at hand, as a symbol that he would return. In the morning he went off to war, and a few months later Marina found out she was pregnant. She wrote to her husband, but in response she received a letter full of anger and humiliation. Victor accused her of cheating, saying he wasn't going to raise someone else's child, and cursed so harshly that Marina later burned those lines in the stove while crying. Hurt and fear took their toll. The woman decided to get rid of the child. In those years it was forbidden, so she had to look for an old folk healer who did such things in secret. The procedure was very risky, but Marina went through with it. However, the child survived against all odds. He was born on time, a strong and healthy-looking boy, and they named him Anatoly. When Victor returned from the front, already decorated with medals, he did not acknowledge his son. From the very beginning, he was cold and distant, called him yours, looked at the boy with contempt, as if he wanted to take revenge on him for feeling humiliated. Outwardly, the family was considered respectable, but Tolik's childhood was joyless. Marina didn't show any affection, whether she didn't want to or couldn't. Victor pretended that the unwanted child didn't exist, and the boy grew up between two walls of silent hostility. Later specialists will say, "Возможно." то, что его когда... They tried to kill him in the womb, which laid the foundation for future pathology, and then the boy grew up unloved, unwanted. And this completed the formation of a future criminal. In general, Utkin is not a matter of a single outburst or isolated incidents, but about a persistent inner deficiency. Since childhood, he never developed a basic sense of self-worth and belonging. There was never a point where he felt like he belonged, like he was needed as a man. Victor doesn't experience this as a pain he can recognize. It turns into a cold, dull, constant background. Against this background, a specific kind of compensation develops. He doesn't just need to live, he needs to feel that he means something. But he didn't know how to get this in normal ways, through closeness, recognition, or achievements, so he started looking for more direct, rough forms of self-affirmation. Control over another person became such a confirmation for him. At the moment when he chose a victim, for the first time in a long while, he felt clarity. There are no doubts there, no inner confusion. There's a simple and clear scheme. He is the one who decides, and the other is the one he can do anything to. It gives him a sense of power that he doesn't have in his ordinary life, and it's very important to him. It's not so much about the act itself, but about the process, about the approach, about the transition from ordinary reality to a situation where everything is already under his control. It seems that this transition was what gave the main effect, which is why it was repeated. At the same time, as always, Utkin didn't look like someone who had something wrong with him. He seemed quite integrated into life. A separate topic is his attitude toward the things he took. It's not about material value, but about capturing the moment. Apparently, it was important for him to hold on to a part of the situation so that it wouldn't disappear completely. It's a way to prolong the feeling of control even after everything is over. And of course, there's also cold vindictiveness. Anatoly Utkin's life, from the outside, seemed ordinary. Everything followed the usual Soviet pattern: school, then vocational school, then the army. He came back to work as a driver, someone people needed and respected. He drank in moderation, didn't cause trouble, and was friendly with his neighbors. He had women and even a wife, a young, simple girl, but they quickly split up, though they never officially divorced. Then there were lovers, short affairs, a bit of envy from other men. Anatoly easily met people, and women liked him. When he was arrested, he was only 30. Young, athletic, with a confident walk, always smiling, a typical Soviet guy who seemed to have everything ahead of him, a job, a home, women, everything going for him. But behind this outward normality, there was something hidden that would later horrify even experienced investigators. Behind the mask of an exemplary driver lived a man responsible for a series of daring thefts, robberies, and 9 murders, each of which was accompanied by cruelty towards the victims. When people tried to understand why, where it came from, what drove him, Utkin remained silent. He sat calmly, did not deny anything, but did not explain either. When asked about his motives, he always replied, "I don't know. That might have been true." It seems he really didn't know. During the interrogations, another story came up about a man who once prevented the maniac from taking a young life. Nikolai Ignatiev, a tractor driver, the same one who once rushed to help Lyubov when she was attacked by an unknown person near the entrance. Back then, he couldn't catch the criminal, but he managed to save the girl. He didn't know that by doing so he was signing his own death sentence. Utkin remembered him. Years went by. The maniac kept traveling along his routes, and the grudge stayed with him like a splinter. 4 years later, fate brought them together again. Nikolai went on a business trip. He needed to repair his tractor. He never came back. Later, the investigation will establish that Utkin volunteered to give Ignatiev a ride. Nikolai didn't recognize him, he just politely agreed. On the way, Utkin turned onto a dirt road, stopped the car, and hit Ignatiev on the head with a crowbar. Then he tightened a scarf around his neck. When it was all over, he stripped the body naked and dumped it under a bridge so it wouldn't be found for a long time. In the end, it was found 3 weeks later. The body was lying in a ravine, mutilated by animals, but the experts managed to identify it. It was a quiet, belated retribution. Cold-blooded revenge that Utkin had been plotting for 4 years. When Marina Utkina found out who she had raised, she said, "I should have smothered you at birth. Legacy, Utkin." Utkin tried to act insane. He ate excrement, smeared it on himself, and smeared it on the walls of his cell. He hoped that by pretending to be crazy, he would avoid the death penalty, but the examination showed that at the time of the crime, he was fully aware of his actions. There was no remorse. The girl's parents wanted to take justice into their own hands, but armed guards were assigned to the prisoner. Utkin himself was sure that he would be allowed to live. He believed that the country needed drivers, so he would get no more than 5 years. He even wrote a petition for pardon. The Soviet government did not share his optimism. On September 12, 1975, Anatoly Utkin was executed by firing squad. What do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, share the video, and subscribe to the Telegram channel. Additional materials will be in the description, and watch other videos. They're being released, even if you aren't always notified.